Good evening and welcome to tonight's program hosted by the Livingston Alumni Association and the Rutgers School of Communication Information Alumni Association. My name is Marty Sitterer, Livingston College class of 77 and Rutgers University Senator, and I'm honored to help host tonight's program. From Rutgers to the National Security Beat, a conversation with Vivian Salama and Steve Miller. Vivian is the national security correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, and she's based in Washington. She's covered U.S. foreign policy and national security issues for nearly 2 decades from more than 80 countries. She's a native of New York. She's earned a bachelor's degree in journalism from Rutgers University, a master's degree in Middle East politics from Columbia University, and a law degree from Georgetown. Steve Miller, Rutgers class of 79, is a professor of professional practice and director of undergraduate studies in the Journalism Media Studies program at School of Communication Information. Steve was named a Loyal Son of Rutgers by the Rutgers Alumni Association in 2019 and is one of the most passionate advocates for Rutgers and the School of Communication Information students, alumni, and staff that you'll ever meet. And yes, by popular demand and at Steve's request, we'll have the after party. For those of you who have been on these webcasts before, we officially end things after we've run out of questions, run out of official time. And then we know that Steve likes to come on and say hi to everybody, and likewise. So we'll have the after party after that. So with that, let's get down to business, and I'll please, Steve, take it away.
Okay. One thing you didn't put there is, if my memory serves me well, Vivian taught for us also.
It's true.
Yeah. How long ago was that? Viv?
Hi, sorry. Siri keeps on wanting to talk to me, and I don't know why, but we'll figure it out eventually.
Oh, everybody wants to talk to you, Vivian.
Did you ask when I taught?
Yeah, what year was that?
I taught, it was just one semester. I taught when I was doing my master's in 2007.
Right, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so Vivian's been, so everybody knows, been a part of the department even after this. And it's funny because Marty was just telling us about his brand new job, and Mazel Tov to Marty. And he used the line from Godfather: every time you think you're going to get out, we always bring you back in. And that's what we do with Vivian all the time.
Yeah.
So, so Viv, let's start with the fact, why would a New York girl come to New Jersey?
It's a good question. I have to kind of put myself back in 17-year-old Vivian's brain. I went to I'd applied to a bunch of schools. I got into a bunch of the SUNY schools, and I just wasn't feeling it. And for some reason, I don't know what, I went down to the Rutgers campus and I was like, this is it. My parents were like, seriously, you're gonna pick the out-of-state school and still go to a state school. And I knew that was the place I wanted to be. And I think partly I just saw there was a lot of diversity on the campus. And it was a city, it was just this glorious large city. And for a 17-year-old who wants to kind of get out into the world, Rutgers is the closest thing to the world that you can kind of get. I felt without being in the city, and I didn't want to be upstate in New York, so it worked. I was happy. It was the best years of my life. Are you kidding? I loved being at Rutgers.
And believe me, I saw you for a lot of that. So
you did. Did I not cut class? I didn't cut class, did I?
No, you didn't cut class. You were working too hard on your television reporting projects.
Right. Which was awesome.
Yeah, no, I said right. No, I'm not looking for those type of things. But originally, if I remember correctly, you wanted to go into television.
I did go into television.
I know you did. Originally you wanted to. No, but
I know. I was a broadcast major back. I don't know if we still do. Do we still do concentrations at Rutgers for journalism, or is everything kind of meshed together?
They're called pathways.
Pathways. Okay. That's a very sophisticated term for it. I kind of think that they should do away with that now, honestly. We can get to that in a minute, but not that I'm trying to tear down the journalism program, but I was, in those days, it made a lot of sense. I was a broadcast major where we focused on the technical elements, and then we focused on the on-air elements as well as writing and all the stuff. And so I wasn't actually, and mind you, I was actually a biology major when I came into Rutgers. And I sort of accidentally stumbled into journalism and thought, you know what, like I'm sitting there dissecting frogs and I'd rather be talking to the frogs than actually dissecting them. It was just not the right major for me. I knew it. My family knew it. They were just like, you're too social for this, this science stuff. And then I took a journalism class and it was like a light bulb went off over my head. I went on over my head where I was just like, oh my God, this is it. And very soon after that, I found myself in television. I took Steve's class. Is there a TV writing class before? Was there a TV
Broadcast
writing
news
class
writing,
before
yeah.
your class? Right.
Yeah.
So I took that.
And-
I remember I took that in the summer. I do remember that. I took that in the summer one year. That was a great summer. Sitting on campus, just like taking classes and doing nothing with your life. It was perfect. I think I waitressed. Anyway, I digress. But yeah, so then I took Steve's class, and pretty soon after that, Steve, you hooked me up with an internship.
Yeah, NBC.
And yeah, and then I started going to NBC. I was like schlepping into the city 3 times a week, sometimes 4 times a week. And the minute I walked into the WNBC studios, which by the way, I was connected to from another alum, another Rutgers alum, Stephanie Christopoulos was a producer, and she brought me in. The minute I walked in, I was like, this is it. Like, this is where I belong. I knew it from the second I stepped foot into the newsroom. So I did 3 internships back to back, summer, fall, and spring. I think I did another summer too. I might have done 4. And then I got hired when I graduated. And it was pretty amazing. Well, there's actually a little bit of a CBS hired me and then NBC hired me like 6 months later. But yeah, I started with them and I kind of climbed with them. I was a assistant producer for WNBC when during September 11th attacks. So I was very much involved in that coverage day and night. We slept in the bureau. You know, I got to go down to ground zero in the aftermath with some of the crews and see some of the horrible things, but also like probably my first real experience with a hostile environment, which as you'll discover was something that stayed with me, and it became a very valuable experience in my career. And it went from there. I stayed in television for years until I wasn't, but I don't want to fast forward. I'll let you ask the question, Steve.
No, but that is my next question. One of the, you say, oh, you have to have what we call pathways or concentrations.
Yeah.
Yet you're, but most people, going back to when my father once said, you can't be a jack of all trades and a master of none, except, you're a master of them all, or mistress
That's
of them
true.
all, because you're, how did you make that transition into newspapers?
It was accidental. So in 2003, by then I had climbed to become the morning show producer. I was building the shows for the morning show at WNBC, the local. So today in New York, for those of you who are still in the New York area, New Jersey area. I was the morning show producer. I was stupidly young for that job, but there you have it. I got it. And I was surviving just barely. I was working graveyard shift. I was going in at 11 o'clock at night and leaving work at noon the next day, if I was lucky. It was brutal, but then the Iraq War started that year, and something about it. So actually, I should rewind. A year before, I did a stint in Providence. I'm not going to even get too deep into that, but I did a stint in Providence, Rhode Island, and then I came back to New York because it's encouraged. You go, you get a smaller news market experience, you come back to the big news market. Otherwise, you're just not going to climb in the way that you're supposed to. So I did that. People urged me after 9/11, you're doing everything, you're producing shows basically, but you're an assistant producer, you're a kid, go out, get the experience, come back. I went for 1 year, they hired me right back as a producer. So I was producing these shows, but while I was in Providence the year before, Daniel Pearl from the Wall Street Journal, funny enough, and now I'm with the Wall Street Journal, Daniel Pearl was killed in Pakistan. And for some reason that rocked my world. I don't know why. I never met Daniel Pearl. May he rest in peace. I didn't know anything about him until he was killed. I'd never been to Pakistan. None of this was on my radar. For some reason, it rocked my world. And I was reading about him, trying to figure out what happened. Why would they do this? You know, and obviously 9/11 was still fresh in my mind with all this. The year after the invasion of Iraq happened, there were a lot of questions surrounding the war. And I was just, there was something about it again, where I was like, I have to be there. And I didn't really understand what it was, but it was a draw that was just killing me on a daily basis. And I remember I was starting to become a ticking time bomb, because every morning I was getting up, and those were the days, if you guys all recall, when Michael Jackson was showing up to the court in his pajamas, and it was like, because of the child abuse accusations, and there was a lot going on, and NBC really wanted to lead with those pictures of him coming into the pajamas and whatever. And, you know, that was compelling viewership. And I was like losing it, because I was like, there's not a war, we should be leading with that. And I was so angry about it. And I started to realize, okay, this is more than just like an interest. This is like, I need to go. So I begged and begged. They wouldn't send me. And so in like November of 2003, I went into the news director's office, and I was like, if you're not going to send me, I quit. I'm going to go by myself. And I did. To this day, my parents still are like, she is crazy. I don't know what she was thinking, but I did. The way I did is I enrolled in an Arabic language news program, at the American University in Cairo in Egypt. And while I was there, I started looking for a job. Although I had a boyfriend at the time. I was like, I'll be back in 6 months. And I like flew off to Egypt, enrolled in this program, and 13 years later, basically, I came back, but with stints in between. And so what happened was, you get out there. And so NBC was really lovely when I left, and they were like, oh, like, we have a bureau in Cairo, just go over there and like, they'll take care of you. Just, you know, tell them that we sent you or whatever. And I was like, great, that's awesome. So I go in and I make an appointment to see the bureau chief, and I walk in, and I was basically like, I'm here. And she's like, who are you? And I was like, oh, well, you guys were going to give me a job. Like, that's what they said in New York. And she's like, we don't have any jobs. What are they talking about? So that was my first real lesson in like, you can't plan, beep. Is this a late night adult situation where I can curse freely? I didn't have a gig. And so I started asking around. I didn't know what to do. Am I going to go back to New York? And finally, I just decided, like, find anything. And so I started asking friends of friends of friends. And finally someone was like, well, there's an English language Egyptian magazine that you could work for. And I was like, all right, whatever, like, that's experience. And so I started there, and like, long story short, that's basically, or short story long, that's basically how I started in print. It was from there. And then I moved to a English language Egyptian newspaper, daily newspaper. And a couple of years in, Newsweek started to called me up, and they were like, we need someone in Egypt. And so I got a Newsweek freelance gig. And then I I ended up moving to Israel and getting a lot of freelance work there. That was during the 2006 wars with Hezbollah and Hamas. So I started working that. And then I came back, I did grad school, but I was still freelancing with Newsweek during those days. And then I was also freelancing with ABC News. So I started doing both at the same time. I was freelancing for ABC News, again, graveyard shift while in grad school, teaching at Rutgers, and also doing Newsweek articles. And so from there, and I was doing a lot of radio at that point too. I started doing NPR and a lot of Voice of America. And so all of a sudden I'm like juggling these mediums. And it was the first time, and we're talking now 2006, 2007. So it goes back to that far back, where like very soon after college I did. But you know what, like, the reason I say, like, students should focus on everything is like, I don't know, maybe I was young and naive, but like, when I was going into broadcast, I thought, like, I need to know how to write a broadcast story, but like, I don't need to learn how to write a print story. And like, gosh, I've written 5,000 word magazine articles since then, and like, done all this deep dive writing. And it was really something that I've learned over the years. And to a large extent, journalism is a profession that you learn from experience. And so that's not necessarily like a bad thing about how I went about it in college. But like, I think to survive now in my industry, in our industry, you have to do everything. And so like now, this week, this week alone, I did 2 podcasts, 3 public speaking things. I'm writing for a newspaper. I'm on Washington Week on Friday. I also did a CNN thing 2 days ago. We have an internal podcast at the Journal. It's constant. It's like churning around. Every week is juggling the mediums. And plus you write stories for the internet, you write stories for the newspaper. The internet writing is a little bit different than the newspaper writing. So like, you know, end up having 10 heads at the end of the day and you're spinning, but you know, it's great because you diversify yourself. And as a result, you're employable in so many different mediums as our industry faces all kinds of different challenges and starts to evolve and jobs kind of morph over the years, which I've seen in my 20 years in this industry, like a lot of changes in the profession. You gotta roll with the punches. Otherwise it's hard to employ you. And so that's basically the one shot, one breath, my entire career in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, you've also, over the past few years, you were at MSNBC, you're at CNN, and back and forth between Wall Street Journal, you're the AP bureau chief in Beirut. So
Baghdad,
sorry, excuse me. And so you've been back, forth, up, down, with all of it, which also is a great lesson for, I wish that some of our students were to say, don't burn any bridges.
Oh yeah, no. And I learned that really like at NBC when I was a kid is when I was leaving, somebody told me it's a small business, we'll see you again. And it's so true. I am still in touch with those people at WNBC who I worked with 20 years ago or 18 years ago when I was a producer. I call on them for advice all the time. And sometimes they call me for advice now because now I'm sort of at a point now where I can kind of offer my advice, which is flattering and also really exciting for a lot of reasons, but definitely not. I mean, our industry is, pardon the term, but it's incestuous. People are constantly coming back and forth and, you're there and then you're there. I think most people would look at my resume and think, my God, she's completely unhireable because I jumped so much. But I have also, there are 2 things that I would say. It's not for everyone to jump this way. And it's definitely not a thing to do in the earlier years of your career. Like try to make a name for yourself, stay in a place, build a reputation for yourself, build clips or build newspaper clips or television clips or radio clips, whatever. And then start shopping around when people know your name. So like the crazy thing about all the jumping I've done in the last like 7-8 years is that I did not apply for a single one of the jobs. They poached me. Before that, it was really difficult. And Steve, you know this. I went through a period for 2.5 years where I struggled to find a job because I was a correspondent for Bloomberg News in the Middle East for 3 years. And at the end, I just wanted to come home for a little bit. I needed a break from the Middle East. It had been a really long stint at that point. It was at the end of the Arab Spring and I was just burned out. And when Bloomberg could not transfer me, I finally said, you know what, I'm going to go back to the US and try to find a job. I quit. It was very good terms. I had a great experience with Bloomberg News. And I came back and it was again, sort of that young, naive girl saying, I'm here, like, give me a job. And, I got tons of interviews because at that point I was 10 years into my career. I was interesting. I sort of had little something to offer people, but even then it was like on the tail of the financial crisis where the media was like reeling at that point, because it took a couple of years for us to get hit and we were hit doubly. We were hit by the internet where everyone was trying to figure out how to deal with this new thing. And then we were also hit by the financial crisis. And so the media industry for 2 years was reeling. And that was when I chose to quit my job and go back to New York. So I was getting tons of interviews, but every single time it's like, you're shortlisted for a job. Oh, we have a hiring freeze. And that kept on happening to me over and over and over again. And for 2.5 years, I was actually quite lucky. I ended up freelancing a ton. I went back to the Middle East for most of it so that I could actually afford to live. But I ended up going back to the Middle East and freelancing, but I could not find a staff job for 2.5 years. Struggled. And I was depressed. I had all kinds of issues going on, like really thinking this is it, like this is the end of my career. But you know what? It ended up, now that I'm now going to turn into everyone's therapist. It ended up being one of the most insightful times of my life, because it was during that time I took the LSATs. Years later, I went to law school, but that was the only time I had to sit down and take the LSAT. And I was like, let me try something different. I took the MCAT, no, not the MCAT, the MBA test, whatever it is. I can't even remember. GRE, the GREs, the GREs.
GMATs.
GMATs, whatever.
Yeah.
You can see how well I did on that one. So I took that one. I took the LSAT, and then I got a call saying the Baghdad bureau chief job is open at the AP. My friend was the bureau chief. He had to leave because his wife gave birth to their kid, and she was like, you're moving back home. You're moving to Dubai with me. You can't stay away. And so he moved home, and they needed a bureau chief because ISIS was taking over Iraq and Syria at that time. And so he called me up and he's like, do you want the job? And at that point I was like, thinking like, I've been reading what's happening in Iraq and Syria. Mind you, a decade earlier, I was dying to go to Iraq, never made it there. And suddenly I'm getting offers to be a bureau chief. And I'm like, oh my God. So I accepted the job because I didn't have any other offers. My first meeting as AP bureau chief, they called me to New York, and I actually started the job in New York, and then they flew me out. My first meeting was to plan our emergency evacuation for when ISIS attacks our bureau. And I was just like, what am I doing? It was the most ridiculous meeting where I'm just sitting there like this, like completely deer in the headlights, and they're going over like maps and plans and backdoor, and basically the emergency evacuation plan that I'm getting now. And I was older, but I'm 32, 33 at that point. And they're like sitting there, and I'm in a bureau of 50 male Iraqi colleagues in Baghdad. They were like, so here's the deal. You're going to run to the French embassy. And I was like, okay. And then what? And they were like, beg them to let you in. I was like, and then what? And they were like, that's the plan. It's like, okay, so if ISIS attacks us, I have to go beg the French embassy to let us in. By the way, the French embassy ended up being jerks, and they never even let us in for parties. Do you think they're going to let us in because ISIS is attacking us? No way. I learned that later on, but at the time I was like, okay, I got it. I got this. And I went off to Baghdad for 2 years. ISIS was taking over the country. But I got some good experiences. It was actually the best experience of my life. I say that, and then you talk to me about covering the Trump White House, and I'll be like, it was the best experience of my life. Every experience was the best.
Yeah, and you said Rutgers was the best. Look, I love your attitude, because everything's the best experience of your life.
Yeah.
It really is, but it always has been. So before I ask my question, we have a question in the chat, which is, Vivian, what role did Livingston College's mission of social justice and your time there play in your professional and personal development?
I'm reading it again so I can think of something really insightful to say. Social justice. Did Livingston College have a mission of social justice? I'm just kidding. I loved Livingston College. So Livingston was sort of had this reputation of being a bit of an underdog when I was there. I don't know if it's still that way, but it certainly was when I was there. And we were like we were considered like the hooligan people, like on the outskirts in Piscataway, and I loved it. Every bit of it. So I don't know about social justice. I mean, maybe I like missed that part, but definitely like as far as my personal and professional life, like, the people, for me, anything you ask me about, like what did any experience do for me professionally, I'm mostly going to tell you that the networks that I made anywhere, whether it was an undergrad or grad school or like my 2 grad schools, the network of people I made were amazing. All of my neighbors, I'm still friends with tons of people. They're all Livingston College people. I mean, a lot of also journalism students, but mostly my Livingston College neighbors and things like that. It was such a community. Everyone was so tight. Really kind of, there was a lot of camaraderie between Livingston College people because of like that underdog status that we had. And it was great. I loved it. I lived in the South Tower, if that still exists, in my first 2 years at Rutgers. And some of it is a blur. I'm not gonna lie. Are my parents on this call? Some of it is a blur, but mostly it was wonderful.
Well, the thing I miss most about Livingston College for the students is they had something called the Livingston College Summer Work Experience Program, in which you could get up to 8 credits of internship credit for free. And
Did they have that when I was there? Did I get free internship credits?
Yeah, I
Oh,
believe you did.
that was great.
But what happened was when there's no more Livingston College as Livingston College, we're down to School of Arts and Sciences and the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences, which is SEBS and SAS, and no more Rutgers College, Douglas College, or anything like that. But those of us who lived through those days missed them terribly because you got that small college feel while going to a large university.
Totally.
And,
yeah.
And so, and Livy was, everybody when I was in school, which, Marty and the other people, Judy, who I know went to Livingston College, could speak to this at some point, but they were the renegades back then. They were getting 4 credits for course I was getting 3 credits for. They were living in the mud and Jeff in the mud and the muck over at Livingston. By the way, Vivian, you wouldn't recognize Livingston now. They actually have shops, and they have a nail salon, a movie theater.
No, that's ruining the
built,
authenticity of it. Come on.
They built it. They have something called you don't eat at Tillet anymore. You eat at the Livingston Dining Commons, where they have a walk station, and they have healthy food stations. And
oh my God, when they brought hoagies to Rutgers when I was there, we were like, hoagies, this is the greatest thing ever. Now they have like fancy stuff.
Oh, they do. This stuff. And the athletic center has solar panels outside that you park under. The whole spiel. It's there's a diner too called Henry's. So,
wow.
One day
I don't know. I have mixed feelings about all this, but good for the students, I suppose. They don't know what it was like to rough it on Livingston.
They don't know what. Anyway, we're not going to get into that. We're not going to. All right. Kathy has a question. Hi, Kathy. How are you? What was your most insightful war story?
Covering the Trump White House, probably. Does it count as a war story? I don't know.
Well, did you cover the insurrection?
I was called up. I was with CNN at that point. I was called up, and they ended up falling back because the protesters were targeting CNN reporters, and they had an all-guy team out prior to me, and I was supposed to go and relieve them. When the guys were being attacked, they were like, honey, you're not going out. So, which is funny because once the guys were being attacked, I was like, let's go, I'm ready. And it didn't work out that way. But I was out and about that day, and it was not cute at all. It was a mess, honestly. But yeah, I mean, I for like war stories and stuff like that, a lot of my stories are not like battle stories. I mean, I do have a little bit of that, but like mostly the people who were around me and like the experiences I had with them in these circumstances, that was more what I remember from a lot of my war experiences, whether it be in Yemen with like hanging out with the women, the wives of Al-Qaeda fighters. And they were taking care of me and protecting me like from the men, from the Al-Qaeda fighters, like their wives were protecting me. And it was like a very strange, trippy experience because they kind of figured out that because I've become quite fluent in Arabic. I left you guys at this studying Arabic at American University. I've since become quite fluent. And so I was able to communicate with them, but from some of my actions, like very basic things, like the way I eat, they were able to tell that I was a Westerner, that I was a foreigner. The women called me out on it and they protected me. They hid my identity. They said, you know, we know you're a foreigner and we don't want them to find that out. So you need to watch what you're doing. And they was trying to show me how to eat properly to like blend in more with them, because we're eating with our hands and I'm making a mess everywhere. And I'm also left-handed, which is like a big no-no in some of these like more smaller conservative villages. So they're like trying to show me with my right hand how to eat like rice with my hands, and I'm just making a mess everywhere. And so things like that, like, you know, those are stories that I think at some point I will collect to write a book about, is like those kind of war stories, not like the fighting war stories, which is like, war is war, you know, there's nothing, you know, there, I don't really have a desire to write about that or to relive a lot of that stuff, but I do love thinking back to some of those moments. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of stories like that. I mean, the people who are around you, and it's not just like in combat places. Like I joke when I say, so I went, you know, kind of the more recent version is in 2016, I was transferred back by the AP and I was supposed to be like a national security correspondent like I am now. But in October 2016, so in September 2016, I found out I got into law school in the evening program and I decided I was going to do it. I was like, great. Or whatever, August, I guess I started. And I was going to do it part-time while doing my national security beat in the morning. It was going to be tough, but whatever. In October, my bosses approached me, October 2016. So this is a month before the 2016 election. And my bosses approached me and said, we decided we do want you to cover national security foreign policy, but we want you to be a White House correspondent. And I was like, just a little context. A lot of reporters would be honored by that. Most war correspondents find that job in particular to be the most boring job on the planet. It's structured and like, you know, people are just feeding you very like formal talking points, and it's not like you're not with people and action and things like that. And so a lot of war correspondents would just sort of look at that and be like, that looks terrible. And so that was kind of my attitude. I remember my boss was like, you don't look happy about this. And I was like, no, I'm fine. You know, okay, that's what you want me to do. And in my head, I'm thinking, you know what, when Hillary Clinton was running for the Senate, I was covering it for WNBC. I know all those people. It seems like a sure thing. You know, everyone's saying Hillary Clinton's going to win. I got this. It'll be fine. A month later, that is not what happened, as you all know. And I was like, oh my dear God, how am I going to cover Donald Trump as president and go to law school at night and like survive? I am still sitting here miraculously. I did it. I'm not really sure how. It's all a blur. So I would love to tell you very interesting stories about the Trump days, but it's all a blur. But starting from December, because I went down to Mar-a-Lago while he was president-elect. And on the first day I saw him down there, he had Larry King with him, like wearing all this bling, and they were waving flag, like American and Israeli flags on the front steps of Mar-a-Lago. It was like a very strange new reality, but that was the first time that I encountered Donald Trump, and I was with him very closely really the next couple of years after that. And love him or hate him, it was actually one of the most fascinating experiences of my entire career. Exhausting. I mean, you think war is tiring, cover Donald Trump and go to law school at night. It's killer, but you know, the man definitely put us to work, but it was really fascinating couple of years. I learned more probably in the last couple of years than I did in my entire career. So there's that. the silver lining. I almost dropped dead of exhaustion, but I learned a lot. So,
okay. So Jeff wants to know, were you fake news?
Yeah, of course, we all were. But Jeff, the minute the cameras went off, I promise you, he was like, how are you guys doing? How are your kids? Do you guys want some food? I'll send you some Trump wine, get the caterer to bring them something to eat. These poor people, I love you guys. And then the cameras went back on and he's like, you're the opposition, you're fake news, you're whatever. That's how it worked. It was all a shtick. It was a shtick. I mean, I say that confidently, like all my colleagues would agree regardless. This is not a political statement. It was shtick. It was part of his appeal to his base was this antagonistic headbutting with the media, which became part of the whole thing. When we went to the rallies and people were booing at us toward the end, they used to throw things at us and we used to get nervous, imagine me coming out of like, Syria and Iraq when it's taken over by ISIS, and I'm sitting there at a political rally, like nervous that something's going to hit me in the head and knock me unconscious, because we were with them in the pool all the time. So, and they were looking for us. They were mostly looking for CNN, and I was only toward the end with CNN for the whole thing, but they didn't care. I mean, they weren't distinguishing us, and I was on CNN more. I was probably on TV more when I was with the Wall Street Journal, ironically, and so no one knows the difference. They just see that I'm on CNN all the time, and so they associate me with the network, and CNN became sort of the like poster child for fake news. But we were all considered fake news,
They blinked and they missed your stint at MSNBC.
They blinked. Yeah, we didn't even get into that.
But
I have visited all the networks at some point.
Okay. So, but before I ask everybody else a question, and this is something I discussed in class, fake news isn't the problem, it's the false news, right? It's the lack of facts and all that.
And that is killer for our industry. And we can't stand that because unfortunately, most people don't distinguish between that. And I tell, even family members, I tell them, listen, please don't post anything. If you see something on a random news site, go and check the other networks. And they say, well, the other networks lie and they hide these things from us. No, I promise you, if it's newsworthy, you will see it there. It will be discussed. Like, get your news from multiple sources. Don't just get it from one. If you see a story, and even if it's you see a story on MSNBC, go to Fox's website, see if it's there too, or compare them. They might have similar reads, but not exactly the same, and slightly different takes on it and stuff like that, which unfortunately it shouldn't be that way, but unfortunately it's becoming that way. So get it from multiple sources, but then there's this the actual deep fake situation where it's either just completely false information or it's manipulated videos, things like that. That stuff is a disaster. And it's now become blurred with what we do. And so it's a real tragedy, and it's something that we're constantly all trying to combat. You see it, a good friend of mine, one of my oldest friends, actually, he was in government and he left and he went to a deepfake company, and he's really passionate about it because you'd find pictures out of war zones in the Middle East coming out, and they're manipulated. And so ISIS puts out a picture manipulated and says, we captured an American or whatever. And it's all photoshopped and whatever, I'm just making up examples. How does anyone then know? So there are ways now to authenticate stories and stuff like that. But with the print stories, there's still no great way to do it besides just due diligence, checking and other websites and things like that. And unfortunately, most people don't either have the patience or the sophistication to really invest time in trying to check stories. And so what ends up happening, Donald Trump is not the first president to turn against the media or to question the media publicly. You go back, Nixon, FDR, you hear examples throughout time. I mean, even before that, of presidents and politicians constantly casting doubt over what reporters write about them, because at the end of the day, our job is to hold them accountable, and they want to push back on a lot of the stuff that we call them out on. And so, it's a constant battle. It did not start with Donald Trump. What Donald Trump's genius was, though, and I use the word genius, is using the media to his own advantage to really create this whole political persona that he wanted to create, that appealed to a certain group of people, a lot of people, but a certain group of people who were going to then take what he says and build on it because they hate the government. The government has been against them. They hate the media has been against them. And it just sort of captured all of that resentment in Washington, in the media, in the mainstream establishment of this or that. And so, and he continues to do it. He just did it, he went back to it was the old routine when he gave his speech on Saturday, adding to it now with the election, questioning the authentic, the results of the election, but then he kind of goes back to the old shtick again, where it's like the media is fake, they're lying to you, they're doing this, they're doing that. And so you believe what you believe, but it's definitely been damaging to our industry. There's no doubt about it. And we just try to work harder to prove everything, to back up our facts with interviews and evidence of whatever we're trying to investigate to really convince people. And it just makes our job a lot harder, but it is what it is.
I love, by the way, I love everybody here because you're doing my job for me. You're coming up with questions. It's beautiful. And I really appreciate it. Judy wants to know, who do you rely on most for your news sources? How do you develop your sources? Federal government employees, White House administration? Question mark.
Well, first of all, the Wall Street Journal, I highly recommend it. It's a great newspaper. It's worth the money.
Well, that's another whole discussion about they're the only ones who stayed with the paywall all the way through.
Give it time. Everyone's going to be with the paywall.
Oh,
there's no way that any media organization is going to exist, moving forward without the paywall. It's just a question of how they do it. And every newspaper is experimenting with different ways. They make it cheaper for students and, more expensive for certain people and businesses and things like that. Or like, the Wall Street Journal started doing free days here and there to kind of showcase what they do and also try to lure in younger readers. The Washington Post is expanding abroad to try to build their readership. And so it's like everyone is trying new ways because the model, there's like no right model. Nobody really has figured out what the right model is yet. Everyone is struggling with keeping revenues going. When you have access to free content on the internet, how do you keep them kind of wanting more? But you just have to keep on trying to convince people that what you offer is quality journalism versus the free stuff that's out there, which may not be. A lot of times is, sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not. So as far as, so to get back to the question though, where I get my news, I probably breeze through every newspaper, all the big ones, definitely New York Times, Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. I read, sometimes I'll skim the BBC since my focus is foreign affairs, national security. So I'll try to like glance at what's going on abroad. I do get my news a lot from Twitter, but I'm very careful about what the source of the news is, who the sources of the news are, who's tweeting and things like that. Twitter, I hate Twitter so much, but you can't live without it at this point as a journalist. Most officials are now posting their statements on, certainly Donald Trump was posting all of his statements online on Twitter while he was president. And despite a lot of people saying you should just ignore his Twitter, you can't. He's the president of the United States. Like, end of discussion. You just can't. Sorry, like you can't ignore it. So, so we had to be on Twitter for that. Not only were we on Twitter, but getting alerts on Twitter on my phone, like text messages linked to Donald Trump's Twitter account and now to President Biden, Secretary of State Blinken, but they tweet a lot more sparingly than President Trump did while he was still on Twitter. He's still banned. So, I do use Twitter. I usually have CNN running on my TV at all times, but it's mostly background noise if it's not on mute. If I know that, like, I am actually a business news junkie and always have a toe in the business world. And so I do love CNBC. I kind of enjoy that. Back when I used to be a producer, I used to always have CNBC on my desk. If Fox has sorry, Siri is talking to me again. No, Siri, go. Sorry. So this is what happens when you put me with technology. It just doesn't really work. Anyway, I hope that answers your question. I will literally go through every single news organization one by one, but I try to cover as many as I can. If it's not too crazy a day and I'm just at my desk, I'll spend the morning trying to like just skim everything. Yeah, and then I'll book if it looks like really good and it's long, I'll bookmark it and go back to it maybe on the weekend or something like that. It just depends.
All right. Paul Sowers has said the Wall Street Journal has poo-pooed the most important story of our time, the climate crisis. Comment.
No, they haven't poo-pooed it. Maybe the editorial, the opinion section has. I have nothing to do with the opinion section of it.
Well, but that's what you're bringing up something that's been source of discussion in our hallways for a while, which is given that, and people make the same argument about Fox, and that is, oh, if you watch during the morning and that Fox, it's real news, and then night's commentary,
or CNN or MSNBC, it's all the same.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But the Wall Street Journal, how can people believe, if they're coming out from the editorial pages in one way, and how can you trust, or can you trust them, on the regular pages?
This is unfortunately a product of where the media has gone in recent years, where, I mean, there's always been opinion pages and things like that, but increasingly certain newspapers and certain television networks are just associated with a certain political ideology, whether it be right or left, and how far left and how far right, whatever. I mean, on the right, you might say you have Fox News, but then you also have OAN, the One America Network, and you have Newsmax and things like that, where like a lot more options to the right. You're just gonna have to take my word for it. Like, we do not talk to the editorial editors to the point where when they, like, let's say when I was covering the White House, when they get an interview with Donald Trump, they don't tell us and we don't ask, because we want to be so separated from what they do. We don't want it to taint what we do, which is trying to reproduce objective news reports. And so someone would look at someone like me where it's like, oh, the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal are more conservative. I just came from CNN 3 months ago, which, is considered liberal. So like, what do it doesn't really work. And most of us are like that anyway. When you're a journalist, you're a journalist. You have to try to focus on being objective. We don't have to get into an argument about whether or not that is accomplished, because I know, trust me, that a lot of people don't think that journalists are totally objective, but it is our job to be objective, and we work very hard at it to try to be as objective as possible. And for me, I think we talk about climate quite a bit in the news pages. What those guys do is their business. Wall Street Journal subscribers may choose to enjoy the opinion pages, and that might be why they come to us, or they might come to us because we're really good journalism as well. So it just all depends.
Well, but what's interesting, but you just hinted at something that's really important, which is, as a national security correspondent, given the role the climate crisis plays in national security, how much do you have to cover it, and what role does it play in what you cover?
Oh, it's huge. And we talk about it all the time. I just doing any Arctic stories, for example, which the Arctic right now, there's competition for power in the Arctic between the Chinese and the Russians and the Americans and Europeans in general, NATO allies. And climate change is a big factor in that, because now with the melting glaciers, the melting ice, it's making it a lot easier for exploration to take place. And also kind of a lot of minerals are coming to the surface and are basically fair game in parts of the Arctic. Not so much fair game, but somewhat fair game. And so there's a race right now to dominate the Arctic because of that. And we talk about that all the time. And it's a climate change story at its heart because of the melting ice. We talk about it from an energy perspective all the time in terms of trying to find new clean energy options and things like that, both from the technical standpoint, from the business standpoint, and then also from the just national security element from the climate side of things. I respectfully disagree, because I think actually we not only do we not poo-poo it in the news section, we cover it pretty extensively and more so. I mean, I think that a lot of news organizations are really just coming to terms with the whole climate change phenomenon. And it's been years in the making, obviously, but I think the period of time where the Trump administration started to cast doubt very publicly about the realities of climate change, it made a lot of people start to really kind of wonder, is this a missed opportunity? Are we totally blowing it when it comes to climate change? And so when the Biden administration came in and they've kind of recommitted to that, I think there was a little bit of a rush by the government as well as by news organizations to just jump all over that and really see what opportunities there are for coverage and for business opportunities as well.
Karen followed up with, do you think America is really behind in recognizing the opportunity in the Arctic due to climate change?
Yeah. I do. I mean, I do. I think that that has been something that the Chinese and the Russians have seen and have been drooling over for years now. And I think we're just starting to catch up on that. And you're seeing it. So there's kind of a joke. I don't know if y'all remember that story about President Trump wanting to buy Greenland. I'm the journalist who broke that story through my sources, which you were asking me about earlier. I mean, I got 6 sources and I was able to break that wild story about his interest in buying Greenland. That was a climate change story. That was an Arctic story. And it was all about, and that's I went out on TV and everyone was like, oh, what a crazy idea he has. And I said, it sounds crazy, but it's not actually, because of the fact that there is this race in the Arctic to dominate right now. And the Chinese and the Russians are having their heyday. And the Trump administration was just starting to realize that. And so the way he kind of framed it was why don't we just buy Greenland? That'll be fine. Which is probably not the best way to frame it, but there was a real logic deep down in the concept of wanting to be in Greenland. And so now you see it. Even the Biden administration, Secretary of State Blinken was just in Greenland 2 weeks ago. I mean, one of the first trips he's done to go to Greenland because of the Arctic, trying to now show that the US is there and is ready to dominate and have a strong presence where a lot of our adversaries have already kind of filled that void. So yeah. I don't know, maybe you disagree. Please argue with me if you want.
Anybody else? Well, I agree with you, Sal. I think that we've missed so many opportunities with this. In fact, I really think that we lost 4 years in the whole struggle for the green energy, and try to combat climate change. It's those 4 years are going to be played out exponentially. So over time, and we've lost so many things along the way during those 4 years, but I'm not going to go into the politics of everything. I mean, just the whole Silk Road thing is just ridiculous. But anyway, I see, Marty, am I right? We have 4 minutes left.
We have 4 minutes left. I think Nancy's question could maybe be the last one.
Okay. Nancy, do algorithms worry you? Thank you, Nancy, by the way. Do algorithms worry you in this industry for how they are being programmed and how we are all being targeted? Artificial intelligence as well.
I have to tell you, Nancy, that this is not my area of specialty. Most of my area of specialty is in military and war and diplomacy and things like that when it comes to some of the technical stuff like cyber stuff and artificial intelligence and intellectual property theft and things like that. It sort of glazes over me a little bit, but because we have very smart people at the Wall Street Journal who are more experts than I am. But I mean, yeah, it should. And I saw there was a cyber question. Yeah. Cybersecurity. Yeah. I mean, we have seen, if there's one thing we've learned in the last 6 months or so, it is that we are getting walloped in the cyberspace. And that crossed administrations, and it's a problem that both administrations have to deal with. We saw SolarWinds hack of the government software last fall, and it's spilled over. And then we've seen a lot of our critical infrastructure targeted in the last couple of weeks. Obviously with the gas situation, I was actually on my honeymoon when that was going on, and I was like in another world, and I came back and I'm hearing about lines at the gas stations here in Virginia and DC, and I was like, oh, I don't know. But yeah, it was it's all pretty crazy, and it's just like really highlighting the need to beef up our security in the cyberspace. And they're trying to do that now, to be honest with you. I mean, that much I know is that they're definitely, there's definitely a lot of effort to see what can be done and how the private sector can play a role with the government, with these sort of outside security firms and things like that, which have been so critical to identifying some of these problems, the outside security firms. But no one really knows like the perfect equation yet, because it's also new and everyone's sort of winging it. So you know, as a non-expert in that area in particular, I'll tell you, I'm scared it's scary as hell. Like it sounds like a bad situation.
Before I pass it back to Marty to close this official part of this, I just have to let everybody know that Vivian's been a star ever since she's been in college. And it's very interesting. I was telling Marty this beforehand. Vivian was in my television reporting group, and Stu Hoda remembers this, that the first thing you have to do in my television reporting is create a commercial. Just do it for fun. And they get thrown into groups, and there were 4 people in Vivian's group. It was Vivian and Tara Wilson, who's now Tara Wilson Beams, and Gloria Vanderham. And I don't remember the 4th person right now, but to show you the quality of students and people who come to Rutgers, Gloria is now, unfortunately, I don't think could join us tonight because she's over in Switzerland, and she's a vice president at Novartis, and she's a big wig with the Alumni Association. And Tara Wilson Beams was just named the superintendent of schools for Atlantic Highlands. So you had all 3 of those people in the same group. So just goes to show the quality of people, in addition to the people who are attending this this wonderful session tonight with Vivian and all of you out there. And just
Senator Menendez's spokesman was in our class.
That's right. Steve Sandberg was in your class also, who is there. And we can go down the laundry list, you know, from Natalie Morales all the way down for people who've been just journalism majors. But the fact is that Vivian's been a star ever since there. And thank you for doing this. And, you know, I love talking to you and coming back. And we didn't even have a chance to talk about Professor Barbara Reed or Professor Roger Cohen in this. Right, exactly. So, Marty, all yours.
Steve, Vivian, thank you so much. Vivian, when was the last time you were back on campus?
Probably Steve had me speak at an event.
No, you spoke at the Capital Alpha.
That was probably the last time. Yeah, I don't know when that was.
That's about 5 or 6 years ago.
No, I think it was more than that. I think it was during my 2 years like stint of freelancing. So okay. I think it was before that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, well, just so anybody knows, KTA Capital Alpha is the oldest journalism honor society in the country. Professor Emeritus Barbara Reed was the advisor who Vivian is still close to today, all these years after her graduation, and asked Vivian to come speak to the students who were receiving the induction into this honor society. And of course, Vivian was brilliant. And yeah, so.
Thanks, everyone.
Vivian,
it's great to virtually meet you all. Hope we can all do this in person sometime.
Absolutely. On behalf of the Livingston Alumni Association, School Communication Alumni Association, thank you so much. If you come back to campus, we promise you lunch, dinner at your choice.
Hoagies.
Dining hall.
Not stuff your face?
Stuff your face, whatever you like. We will do the grand tour of New Brunswick. This concludes the program. Thanks so much. We're going to turn the recording off and then go to the after party.